A black teen was kicked out of a government building for looking suspicious. He didn't argue. He just made one phone call, and what happened next flipped the city upside down. The afternoon sun poured across the marble steps of the city's civic center, gilding everything it touched in warmth and brightness. Pedestrians moved in loose clusters under the vast sky, their shadows long and flickering across the stone. The towering building stood still and regal, with its gold accents glinting against the white stone, a monument to power and progress. But inside, the temperature dropped, not just from the hum of overzealous air conditioning, but from something colder still, something unspoken, the chill of scrutiny, of assumptions sharpened by years of silent practice. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Darius stepped inside. He looked like any other 17-year-old on a weekday afternoon. Black hoodie, dark jeans, worn sneakers, and a gray backpack slung over one shoulder. His clothes were clean, pressed even, and his posture held a quiet confidence. He didn't hesitate, didn't shuffle or second-guess himself. He knew where he was going. He was here on purpose. Still, the front desk receptionist barely flicked, her eyes upward as he entered. Her polished nails tapped quietly on the surface of her keyboard. She didn't ask if he needed help. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at him long enough to register the shape of his face. Darius kept walking. The click of his shoes against the pristine floor echoed louder than he expected, the rhythm of his steps catching between the vast marble columns and high ceilings. He passed government workers in suits, a mother wrangling her toddler, a janitor wheeling a mop cart. Everyone seemed to belong. At the end of the lobby stood a set of elevators framed in brass. Darius approached them without hesitation, eyes forward, his heart calm but alert. This wasn't his first time in the building. He'd been here before, usually through the back entrance with his father. But this time he came on his own. Behind him, a low crackle from a walkie-talkie broke the steady white noise of the lobby. A pause, then a quiet whisper, meant to be unheard. Darius didn't turn around, but he felt it. Two security guards, both white, stepped away from their post near the entrance. One was younger, with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses still perched on his head like a badge of defiance. The other was broader, older, his belt weighed down with too many things. Keys, radio, flashlight, maybe a grudge or two. They were watching him now. Not the man in a suit texting furiously, not the woman juggling files and a coffee cup. Him. "Hey, you," the younger one called out, his voice just loud enough to draw glances from a few passers-by. Darius stopped at the elevator. His finger hovered over the button. He turned slowly. "Yes? Where do you think you're going?" the older one asked, already stepping forward. "To the 3rd floor," Darius replied, keeping his voice neutral. He didn't look away. "I have an appointment." The younger guard scoffed. "With who?" Darius blinked. "That's not something I have to tell you." A silence hung in the air, not dramatic, not tense, just expectant. Darius knew that silence. He had grown up in it, walked through it, eaten breakfast with it. It was the sound of suspicion sharpening its edges. The older guard stepped closer. "Let me see some ID." Darius reached into his pocket and handed over a school-issued student ID. The guard took it without thanks, glancing at it like it might bite him. "School ID?" the younger one said, eyebrows raised. "You don't have any government-issued ID?" "I'm 17, Darius said, trying not to let frustration show. "This is what I have." The older one handed it back, uninterested. "You can't be here without proper identification. This building's not open for unsupervised minors." Darius frowned. "That's not true. I've been here before. I'm supposed to be." "Step outside," the younger one said, cutting him off. "Now." Darius's hand curled around the strap of his backpack. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't resisting. But he wasn't moving either. "I told you," he said quietly. "I have an appointment. I'm not doing anything wrong." That was when the older guard reached out, firm but not gentle. He gripped Darius's arm just above the elbow, the way someone might grab an object out of place. The receptionist looked up now, but she said nothing. Darius's bag was taken from his shoulder. He was being moved, led, not asked. As they walked him toward the door, his sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished tile. A woman nearby lowered her phone slowly. A man in a blazer frowned but looked away before their eyes could meet, and then they were outside. The doors hissed shut behind them. The sun was still warm, still bright. The plaza bustled as it had before, but Darius stood alone at the top of the steps, staring at the place where he had been. He exhaled once, then pulled out his phone with slow, steady fingers. He dialed a number. "Dad," he said when the voice answered. It happened again, as requested. The style remains third-person immersive with emotional depth, rich detail, and slow tension building. The marble tiles beneath Darius's feet had suddenly become colder. The polished surface, once neutral and passive, now seemed like a stage lit too brightly, every movement exposed, every word amplified. "Hey!" The younger guard called again, more sharply this time, his voice echoing off the walls. "Where do you think you're going?" Darius turned, already knowing what was coming. His face didn't flinch. His expression was composed, but behind his eyes a curtain dropped. He'd rehearsed this moment in his mind 100 times. Still, it always hit differently in real life, unexpected even when expected. "I have an appointment," he said calmly. The guards didn't stop because he'd broken a rule. They stopped because he didn't fit the image of who belonged here. Their eyes weren't curious, they were calculating. "Appointment with who?" the older one asked, stepping closer. His badge gleamed in the fluorescent light, but his eyes didn't. There was no warmth there. Just practiced skepticism. Darius hesitated. He didn't know them names, but he knew how this worked. Being right didn't always mean being safe. "It's personal," he said, keeping his voice even. "I'm allowed to be here." The younger guard scoffed under his breath, already reaching for his radio. "Need you to show some ID, son." The word "son" landed like a slap wearing a smile. Darius reached into his pocket, pulled out his school ID and handed it over. The older guard took it, studied it briefly like it was written in another language, then handed it back with an expression that said everything. "This isn't valid ID, this is a high-security building. You need government ID or a visitor badge." "I'm not here to visit," Darius replied. "I have a scheduled—" "We don't need kids wandering around here." The younger guard's voice hardened. "Let's go. Step outside." Darius blinked. His body remained still, but a storm brewed under his skin. The air between them felt thick, like it had absorbed every ounce of tension and held it in suspension. "I haven't done anything wrong," he said. "I told you. I'm here to meet someone. I was given permission." The older guard reached for him, not roughly but not gently either. His thick fingers wrapped around Darius's arm just above the elbow, the way someone might handle something fragile if they didn't actually care whether it broke. "Sir," Darius said, trying not to flinch, "you're making a mistake." The younger one took his backpack without asking, just unhooked it from his shoulder and held it like it was a threat to be neutralized. And through it all, the receptionist sat still at her desk, her eyes flicking to the scene with the faintest glint of interest, then back to her screen. Not a word, not a question. Her silence rang louder than any siren. The people in the lobby began to notice. A woman in a power suit paused at the security checkpoint, her lips pressed tight. A delivery man by the elevator pretended to scroll on his phone, but his eyes stayed. Locked on the unfolding scene, Darius's voice didn't rise. He knew better. Loudness was a weapon often turned against the person using it. "I told you," he said, his voice level but trembling at the edges. "I'm here to meet my father." "Outside," the older guard snapped, tightening his grip. The lobby door opened with a sigh of compressed air as Darius was ushered out. His sneakers squeaked once, then landed on hot concrete. He squinted briefly into the sunlight, the warmth outside stark against the chill he carried from inside. Behind him, the door closed with the hiss of finality. There was a moment, just a second, when everything stood still. A pigeon flapped noisily from the top of the stone railing. A car horn honked lazily in the distance. Somewhere, a child laughed. But here, on the steps of the building, Darius stood alone. Watched, not helped. His backpack was shoved into his chest with a flat thud. The younger guard didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The smirk on his face spoke fluently in condescension. Darius stared at the door for a moment, not moving. His face burned, not from the sun, but from the heat of being made a spectacle, of having his dignity peeled away in layers, quiet ones, deliberate ones, the kind of humiliation that didn't scream. It whispered. People walked past him. Some glanced. A few did double takes, but no one stopped. He sat down on the concrete steps, his elbows resting on his knees, the weight of his backpack anchored between his feet. He pulled out his phone and stared at the screen for a beat. Then, he hit the familiar name in his favorites. The call picked up after one ring. "Dad," he said quietly. His voice cracked only slightly. It happened again. There was a pause on the other end. Just breath, then a voice. Calm, controlled, but laced with anger. "Where are you?" "Front steps. I'm on my way." Darius hung up, leaned back slightly, and let the silence fold over him. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even angry. Not yet. He was just tired. Tired of proving he belonged in rooms he'd already been invited into. Tired of having to explain. That identity didn't come with a suit or a title. And above all, tired of being seen as a problem before being seen as a person. The sun was warm on the steps, but Darius couldn't feel it. He sat hunched forward, elbows resting on his knees, backpack crumpled at his feet like something discarded. His fingers trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the kind of anger that didn't roar. It simmered, deep, steady, dangerous. The kind of anger that comes from knowing this wasn't an accident. It had happened before, too many times. Stores, classrooms, parking lots. Always a quiet doubt about whether he belonged. Always a subtle test of how much he would take before someone decided he was threatening. He blinked against the sunlight, trying to keep his jaw steady. His phone was slick in his palm from the sweat of his clenched fist. He unlocked it with a practiced swipe, tapped the name he knew by heart. One ring. That was all. "Dad." It happened. "Again," he said, low and flat. A beat of silence on the other end. Not confusion, not surprise, just breath, heavy and measured. "Where are you?" came the voice, calm as steel. "Front steps. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The call ended. Darius let the phone rest on his thigh. He didn't look up. His eyes were locked on the lines between the concrete slabs beneath his shoes, the way they spider-webbed into perfect divisions. Clean, cold, indifferent. Inside the building, the Yao's lobby had already returned to its usual rhythm. The receptionist was back to clicking keys. The elevators pinged, opening and closing like clockwork. People moved past without sparing a second thought to the boy who had just been escorted out like a trespasser. Near the security station, the two guards stood with arms crossed, their conversation shaded by that peculiar tone used when men try to make cruelty sound like professionalism. "Kid didn't even have a real ID," the younger one muttered with a chuckle. "Walks in like he owns the place. Probably some TikTok stunt or protest thing," the older one replied. "Entitled these days. Think they can go anywhere, say anything." The younger one laughed, fiddling with the strap of his vest. "He'll think twice before walking into a government building next time." That's when the intercom crackled. To life. The voice was smooth, clipped, and carried weight. "Security team, report to the mayor's office. Immediately." Both guards went still. The younger one raised an eyebrow. "What's that about?" The older one didn't answer. He was already heading toward the elevator, his jaw tight. The other followed, the laughter draining from his face. The mayor's office was on the top floor, where the air felt thinner, not because of the altitude but because of the expectations. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling and framed black and white photos of previous mayors shaking hands and cutting ribbons. In the center sat a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single block of mahogany, wide and heavy and dignified. Behind it stood Mayor Richard Langston. He didn't look up when the guards entered. He was staring down at a photo in a frame. His fingers were clenched around it so tightly that the glass trembled. He was a tall man, solid in stature, with the kind of presence that made rooms feel smaller. His charcoal suit was sharply pressed, his tie immaculate. But in this moment, none of that mattered. The only thing that did was the storm gathering behind his eyes. He looked up, and he did not smile. "Do you recognize this young man?" He asked, placing the photo face up on the desk. The guard stepped forward. It was a candid picture. Darius at a community park cleanup, grinning, sleeves rolled up, sunlight on his face. He looked proud, young, free. The younger guard paled slightly. The older one cleared his throat. "Sir, I think that's the kid from—" The mayor cut him off. "That is my son." The silence that followed was not passive. It was sharp, charged, the kind that wrapped around your lungs and squeezed. Neither guard spoke. The mayor's voice dropped, quieter than before, but colder. "You put your hands on him. You humiliated him. You decided, without asking a single question, that he didn't belong here. Sir, we didn't know. You didn't care to know." The mayor's hand slammed flat against the desk, not loud, just enough to make the glass of water beside it quiver. The younger guard opened his mouth, then closed it. He suddenly looked very small in his uniform. "You looked at a black teenager walking into a public building," the mayor continued. "And the first thing you thought wasn't, 'How can I help?' It was, 'How do I stop him?'" His words didn't rise in pitch, but they struck like hammers. "Let me be absolutely clear," he said, stepping out from behind the desk, his voice now level with their eyes. "If that young man hadn't been my son, if he had been any other boy who looked like him, would you have treated him any differently?" The guards said nothing. They didn't need to. The mayor stared at them, letting the silence stretch, letting the truth sit heavy in the air. "Dismissed," he said finally. "Wait downstairs. You'll be contacted by Internal Affairs." As they turned to leave, the younger one paused in the doorway, as if about to say something. An apology, maybe. But then he saw the way the mayor looked at him, not with rage, with something worse. Disappointment. He said nothing. He walked out. The door closed with a soft click behind them. Mayor Langston stood alone in his office. He looked down again at the photo of his son, still resting on the desk. His fingers relaxed slightly. He picked it up, wiped a smudge from the glass, and set it back in its place. Then he turned toward the window where the city shimmered under the sun, bright, bustling, and still deeply broken. The lobby of City Hall had not changed. Same marble floors, same echoing footsteps, same antiseptic quiet. But this time, Darius didn't walk in alone. A staff member, tall, crisply dressed in a city council blazer, walked half a step ahead of him. Her presence was quiet but commanding, like a lighthouse, not loud but impossible to ignore. As the glass doors parted with a soft hiss, the same security guards from earlier straightened at their post. Their casual slouch evaporated like mist under a sudden light. The moment they saw Darius again, something in their bodies shifted. Shoulders stiffened, faces flushed. He wasn't just a kid anymore, not in their eyes. Now he was a reckoning. "The owl." Staffer spoke, not bothering to lower her voice. "The mayor is expecting him. You'll stand aside." No arguments, no clipped replies. Just two silent men, suddenly unsure of their footing in a building they thought they controlled. Darius didn't look at them. Not yet. As he passed, he felt the heat of their gaze, confused and anxious. Their confidence, their quiet swagger from earlier, had drained like color from a washed-out photo. What had been certainty was now discomfort. What had been arrogance was now fear. And Darius? He was quiet. He was calm. But inside, there was a tremor. Not of fear, but of the weight. Of knowing what came next mattered, not just for him, but for Anyone who looked like him, walked like him, had been questioned like him. The elevator ride was silent. When the doors opened on the top floor, the hallway greeted him with wood-paneled walls and soft, golden light pouring through long windows. He remembered running through these halls as a child, chasing his father's footsteps. He remembered the echo of his laughter here once. Now, every step felt like thunder. The double doors to the mayor's office were already open. Mayor Langston stood at the window with his back to the room. He didn't turn when they entered. He didn't need to. "Leave us," he said softly to the staffer. She nodded and closed the doors behind her. The room went still. Darius stood silently near the desk. Across the room, the two security guards were already present, called in moments earlier and made to wait. The older one was standing rigid, arms folded across his chest. The younger one lingered near the wall, fidgeting with his ID badge like it might protect him. Mayor Langston turned slowly. His expression was unreadable. Not anger, not sadness. Something in between. Controlled. Piercing. "You see him now?" he asked, voice quiet but razor sharp. "The same young man you pulled out of this building like a threat?" Neither guard answered. Langston stepped closer, not raising his voice. "This wasn't about protocol," he said, his tone clean and surgical. "This wasn't about identification or building policy. This was about who you assumed my son was." Looked from one guard to the other, letting the silence bite between sentences. "You didn't ask. You didn't verify. You didn't speak to him like a citizen. You treated him like a suspect." The younger guard opened his mouth, but stopped. There were no words that could save him from the truth. The mayor's voice did not tremble. "That assumption," he continued, "could have cost my son more than just his dignity. It could have cost him his safety, his future, his life." The words hung in the room like a sudden drop in temperature. Real. Heavy. Unshakable. And then Darius spoke. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room with something far louder than volume. "I knew you'd see my skin before my reason for being here." Both guards looked at him now. For the first time, really looked. Darius didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just stood there, a 17-year-old boy who had walked into a government building like he belonged and had been treated like he didn't. And now he had made them look in the mirror. Mayor Langston took a breath. Then he turned back to the guards, delivering the final words with the weight of both a father and a public servant. "You didn't just disrespect a young man," he said. "You disrespected the office I hold, and every kid who walks into this building believing they belong." Silence followed. Not empty silence, but full, with tension, with consequence, with truth. Langston gestured to the door. "You're dismissed. Effective immediately. Internal Affairs will contact you." The guards hesitated, then left. Shame etched into their posture. Darius didn't watch them go. He looked at his father instead. Langston's face softened for a moment. "Not much, but enough." "You okay?" he asked. Darius nodded slowly. "Yeah." But they both knew okay was a complicated word. Langston stepped forward, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. It wasn't just comfort. It was pride. It was apology. It was legacy. In that moment, they weren't just mayor and citizen. They were father and son, standing together not just against injustice, but for something greater. Belonging. This scene delivers emotional closure, gentle yet powerful narrative arc resolution, and the moral reflection you've asked for. It continues seamlessly from the previous parts. The following Monday, the morning light cast soft golden stripes across the lobby floor of City Hall, but the atmosphere had shifted. The guard booth stood empty. A small white paper sign taped to the glass read, "Closed for reassignment. Please use the north entrance." No one said the guards had been fired. Officially, they were suspended pending internal investigation. But in a building where whispers traveled faster than elevators, everyone knew. The stillness they left behind echoed louder than their presence ever had. Mayor Langston hadn't held a press conference. He hadn't needed to. The moment had spoken for itself. His silence was strategic, not passive. What came next would matter more than headlines. That week, a citywide initiative quietly rolled out, a mandatory training on implicit bias and racial assumptions in public service. City employees, contractors, even volunteers were required to attend, not just once, quarterly. It wasn't branded as punishment. It was framed as clarity and accountability. Flyers were posted in every department office. Bias lives in moments we don't notice. Let's start noticing. Mandatory workshop, City Hall, room 402. Darius didn't return to City Hall the next day, or even that week, but when he did, it wasn't through the main entrance. He arrived quietly with a notebook under his arm and headphones draped around his neck. No press, no suit, no entourage. He was just a teenager, a student, someone who liked chess, who hated multiple choice exams, who thought mango smoothies were overrated. But now when people saw him, they paused a little longer. Not because of his last name, but because they remembered something else. They remembered his calm, how he had spoken without shouting, how he had held his ground without throwing punches or names, how he had made a system blink and see itself clearly, even if only for a moment. At Lincoln High, word had spread before he even got back from that fateful day. Some students whispered in awe, "He's the mayor's son?" Others said nothing, but looked at him differently. But Darius never mentioned the incident. Not once. Not in debate club. Not in homeroom. Not even when his civics teacher referenced it during a lesson on institutional power. Because it wasn't about being right. It was about being seen. One afternoon as he waited for the bus, a younger student he didn't recognize walked up to him, maybe a sophomore with nervous eyes and a hoodie that swallowed most of his frame. "You really didn't yell at them?" the boy asked, voice quiet. "No," Darius replied, shaking his head. "What did you do?" "I stayed," Darius said simply, "and then I stood back up." The boy nodded slowly. That was enough. Weeks passed. Fall turned to winter. News cycles moved on. But the story remained. Not splashed across tabloids, not shouted on viral feeds, but whispered in classrooms, shared in trainings, remembered in quiet corners of the city, where bias had once been just a rumor until someone forced it to speak its name. The mayor never said publicly that the incident involved his son. He didn't need to. He didn't want to turn the story into politics. It wasn't about clout. It was about consequence. But behind the scenes, change had begun. City Hall rewrote visitor protocols, not to restrict, but to humanize. Security. Staff underwent interviews, not interrogations, but reflections. A new advisory board was formed, including youth voices, one of them, Darius's. He didn't wear a title. He didn't ask for one. He just showed up. One night after a council meeting, Mayor Langston sat alone in his office, the city's lights twinkling through the glass like silent witnesses. On his desk sat the photo of Darius, the same one he'd shown the guards. The boy in the picture still smiled, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow from a park cleanup. A kid proud of small things. He thought of how easily that image could have been lost, replaced by one more headline, another statistic, another misunderstood moment ending in silence. But this time it hadn't. This time the story didn't end in tragedy. It ended in reckoning. He leaned back in his chair and whispered softly. Not to anyone in particular, but to the quiet. He didn't need to say who he was. They should have seen it already. Outside, the city pulsed onward. Buses groaning. At corners, streetlights blinking amber and red. Students laughing under orange skies. Somewhere, someone was still being watched too closely in a store. Somewhere else, another boy would walk into a room and feel like he didn't belong. But something had shifted, and even if the change was small, it was real. Because a boy had stood, up not for attention, not for applause, but because he knew his worth wasn't up for debate. And the city remembered. Injustice often begins with silence and ends with truth spoken too late. But on this day, a young man proved that worth isn't worn on a badge or suit. It's carried in how you stand, even when the world tells you to sit down.